The Haunting of Room 207. Nestled on the edge of a small, unremarkable town was the Maplewood Inn, a charming, rustic hotel known for its cosy atmosphere and vintage charm. It was a favourite among travellers looking for a quiet place to stay. However, there was one room that was seldom spoken of, Room 207. Locals whispered that it was cursed, that those who stayed there never left the same. The owners, reluctant to lose business, would simply redirect guests to other rooms, leaving 207 vacant whenever possible. One autumn evening, a weary traveller named James checked into the inn. James was a skeptic by nature, a journalist by trade, and had spent his career debunking myths and legends. When the elderly receptionist, Mrs. Whitmore, hesitated to give him the key to Room 207, he sensed a story and insisted on staying there. Mrs. Whitmore reluctantly handed over the key, her hand trembling slightly. "Please, if you need anything, don't hesitate to call the front desk," she said. Her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and something else, fear perhaps. James smiled reassuringly. "I'm sure I'll be fine, but thank you." He took the old-fashioned brass key and made his way up the creaking wooden stairs to the second floor. The hallway was dimly lit, with worn carpet and faded wallpaper that added to the inn's antique charm. Room 207 was at the end of the hall, its door looking no different from the others. James unlocked it and stepped inside. The room was quaint with floral wallpaper, a four-poster bed, and a small writing desk by the window. It felt like stepping back in time. He set his suitcase down and began to unpack, but as he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He chalked it up to the stories Mrs. Whitmore had told him and decided to ignore it. As the night wore on, James settled into the room, jotting down notes and ideas for his next article. Around midnight, he began to feel drowsy and decided to turn in. He climbed into bed, pulled the heavy quilt up to his chin, and soon drifted off to sleep. He awoke to the sound of whispering. At first, he thought it was a dream, but as he lay there, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They seemed to be coming from all around him, yet there was no one else in the room. He sat up, his heart pounding, and listened. "James!" The whispers seemed to call his name, a chorus of voices blending together in a haunting melody. He felt a chill run down his spine and reached for the bedside lamp. The bulb flickered but did not come on. The room was plunged into darkness, the whispers growing more insistent. "Who's there?" he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. Then, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically and he could see his breath in the air. The sense of being watched intensified, and he felt an overwhelming urge to flee. Just as he was about to leap out of bed, the lamp flickered back on. The room was empty, but the sense of dread lingered. Determined to prove to himself that it was just his imagination, James decided to investigate. He searched the room thoroughly, checking under the bed, in the closet, and even behind the curtains. There was no one there. Feeling slightly foolish, he climbed back into bed, telling himself it was just the power of suggestion. But as he closed his eyes, he heard a soft creaking sound, like footsteps on the old wooden floorboards. He held his breath, straining to hear. The footsteps grew louder, coming closer to the bed. He opened his eyes and saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of the bed. It was a woman, her face pale and eyes hollow, staring at him with an expression of sorrow and desperation. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the light once more. James bolted upright, scrambling for the light switch. When the lamp finally flickered on again, the woman was gone, but the cold, oppressive atmosphere remained. He spent the rest of the night sitting up in bed, the covers clutched tightly around him, his eyes darting around the room. The next morning he checked out early, unable to shake the feeling that he had been in the presence of something truly otherworldly. Mrs. Whitmore took one look at his pale, drawn face and nodded knowingly. "Room 207, she said quietly. "It's not the first time." James left the inn, vowing to uncover the truth about what he had experienced. His research led him to discover that years ago, a young woman named Eliza had been a guest at the inn. She was a writer, staying in room 207 while working on her latest novel. One stormy night, she disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only her journal, filled with entries about strange occurrences and an overwhelming sense of being watched. Despite extensive searches, Eliza was never found, and her disappearance remained a mystery. The inn's staff and guests still report sightings of her ghostly figure and strange, inexplicable events in room 207 to this day. James published his story, detailing his experience and the history of room 207. Many readers dismissed it as fiction, but those who had stayed at the Maplewood Inn knew better. They knew that some mysteries were not meant to be solved, and some spirits were not meant to rest. And so, room 207 remained a place where the past and present intertwined, and where the restless spirit of Eliza still wandered, forever seeking what had been lost to her on that stormy night. Eldridge Road. Eldridge Road was a winding, lonely stretch of asphalt that cut through dense woodland on the outskirts of a small rural town. It was a road few travelled unless they had to, and the locals spoke of it in hushed tones, sharing stories of strange occurrences and eerie sightings. One such story was more chilling than the rest, a story that happened not long ago to a young man named Alex Brinkworth. Alex was a college student, home for the summer, working part-time at a gas station to save money for the upcoming semester. One night, after closing up the station, he offered to give his co-worker, Jenna, a ride home. Jenna lived on the other side of town, and the fastest route was via Eldridge Road. Though they both had heard the rumours, they laughed it off, agreeing it was just a quicker way to get home. The night was dark, with a thick fog rolling in, making the road even more ominous. The trees loomed overhead, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. As Alex and Jenna drove deeper into the woods, the conversation dwindled, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Halfway down Eldridge Road, the car's headlights began to flicker. Alex frowned and tapped the dashboard, but the lights continued to flicker sporadically. Suddenly, the car's engine sputtered and died, leaving them stranded in the middle of the dark, foggy road. "Great," Alex muttered, trying to restart the car without success. "Must be the battery." Jenna looked around nervously. "Alex, we need to get out of here. This place gives me the creeps." Alex nodded. "I know, but there's no cell signal out here. Let's walk back to the gas station, it's not too far." They grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and started walking, the beam cutting through the thick fog. The air was still, and the only sounds were their footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves. The deeper they walked into the woods, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. After about 10 minutes of walking, Jenna suddenly stopped, grabbing Alex's arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Alex strained to listen but heard nothing. "Hear what?" "Footsteps. Behind us." They turned and shone the flashlight back down the road. At first there was nothing but swirling fog. Then they saw it. A shadowy figure standing just at the edge of the light, motionless and silent. "Who's there?" Alex called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. The figure didn't respond or move. Jenna tightened her grip on Alex's arm, fear evident in her eyes. "Alex, let's go, now!" They quickened their pace, constantly looking back. The figure remained where it was, but a feeling of dread grew with each step they took. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached the gas station. Alex hurried to unlock the door and they rushed inside, locking it behind them. Breathing heavily, they looked out the window, expecting to see the figure. The road was empty, the fog pressing against the glass like a living entity. They stayed inside, too afraid to venture out again, and waited for dawn. As the first light of morning broke, they felt a sense of relief. Alex called a tow truck, and they walked back to the car. The sunlight cut through the fog, revealing the road more clearly. When they reached the car, they found it just as they had left it, except for one thing. The hood was covered in deep, parallel scratches, as if something with long claws had tried to tear it open. Shaken, Alex and Jenna decided not to tell anyone about the figure or the scratches. They left Eldridge Road as fast as they could, vowing never to take that route again. The car was towed and repaired, but Alex sold it soon after, unable to shake the feeling of being watched whenever he drove it. Over time, they tried to put the incident behind them, but the memory lingered. Alex continued his studies and Jenna eventually moved away. They kept in touch but rarely spoke of that night. The story of Eldridge Road became just another part of the town's lore, a whispered warning to those who dared to venture down its haunted path. Years later, Alex read an article about a series of disappearances near Eldridge Road. The victims all vanished under similar circumstances. Their abandoned cars were found with the same deep scratches on the hood. The police had no leads and the cases remained unsolved. Haunted by the memory, Alex returned to Willow Creek one last time. He drove to Eldridge Road in broad daylight, hoping to find some closure. As he stood at the edge of the woods, the sunlight filtering through the trees, he heard it, a faint, distant whisper, like the sound of footsteps on fallen leaves. The oppressive feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever. He left quickly, never to return. The shadow of Eldridge Road followed him for the rest of his life, a reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved and some roads are best avoided.